The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 4:30, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors of Ashford Manor like a funeral bell. Miss Evangeline Ashford pressed her ear against her bedroom door, listening for any sound that might betray a servant's early rising or her stepfather's restless wandering. Nothing. Only the whisper of wind through the Virginia pines and the distant murmur of the Potomac River flowing past their estate. She had planned this moment for 3 weeks, down to the very minute. Her traveling dress lay folded on the chair, dark blue wool that would not show the dust of the road, practical boots that could carry her miles if necessary. The letter she had written to her mother sat sealed on the writing desk, its contents a careful mixture of apology and defiance that would explain everything and nothing at all. What Evangeline could not have planned for was the figure standing motionless in the shadows of the garden below her window, a man whose presence turned her carefully orchestrated escape into something far more dangerous than mere flight. The Duke of Ravenshollow had been watching Ashford Manor for hours, and he knew exactly what she intended to do. Miss Evangeline Ashford was the daughter of Virginia's most prominent shipping family, a young woman whose beauty was matched only by her stubborn independence, a quality that had made her the subject of much speculation in Richmond society. What she concealed beneath her reputation for spirited conversation and charitable works was a desperate plan to flee an arranged marriage to a man whose cruelty was whispered about in drawing rooms but never spoken aloud. Her freedom hung by the thinnest of threads, and she was prepared to cut them all, rather than submit to a life of elegant captivity. "Stay with me until the truth can no longer remain hidden." Evangeline moved through her room with the practiced silence of someone who had rehearsed these motions countless times. Her hands trembled only slightly as she fastened the small traveling bag that contained everything she valued: her mother's jewelry, the deed to a small property in Charleston that her grandmother had left her, and enough money to survive until she could establish herself as a governess or companion in some distant city. The marriage contract lay on her stepfather's desk downstairs, signed and sealed, binding her to Lord Pemberton in a union that would merge 2 shipping empires and secure her family's financial future. What the contract did not mention was Pemberton's reputation for violence, his treatment of his first wife, or the bruises that Evangeline had glimpsed on the arms of his household staff during her single, horrifying visit to his estate. She had tried every respectable avenue of escape: appeals to her mother, who was too weak to oppose her new husband, letters to distant relatives who politely declined to interfere in family matters, even a desperate conversation with the local minister who had spoken gravely of duty and obedience while avoiding her eyes. Society had decided her fate, and society would not be swayed by the fears of one young woman. The window opened silently. She had oiled the hinges days ago, anticipating this moment. The rope she had fashioned from bed sheets was already secured to the heavy oak bedpost, tested and retested to ensure it would hold her weight. 30 feet to the ground, then a 1/4 mile through the woods to where she had hidden her horse, and she would be free. She was halfway out the window when she saw him. The Duke of Ravenshollow stood beneath the ancient magnolia tree, his dark coat making him nearly invisible against the trunk, but his face was turned upward, watching her with the patient attention of a man who had been expecting this exact moment. Even in the pre-dawn darkness, she could see the slight smile that played at the corners of his mouth, not mocking but knowing, as if her escape attempt was a move in a chess game he had been playing for far longer than she realized. Evangeline froze, one leg still inside her room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alexander Blackwood, Duke of Ravenshollow, was the most dangerous man in Virginia society, not because of any scandal or impropriety, but because of his reputation for seeing through every deception, anticipating every strategy, and always getting what he wanted. He had arrived in Richmond 6 months ago on mysterious business, had been welcomed into the highest circles despite his English title, and had observed the social machinations of plantation society with the detached interest of a naturalist studying exotic specimens. What he wanted with her, Evangeline had never been able to determine. He had been present at every social gathering she attended, had partnered with her for precisely 2 dances at each ball, and had engaged her in conversations that seemed perfectly proper on the surface, but left her with the unsettling feeling that he could read her thoughts. When her engagement to Pemberton had been announced, he had offered his congratulations with the same polite smile he wore now, but his eyes had held something that might have been regret. "Miss Ashford," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the still air, "I believe you may be in need of assistance." She considered her options rapidly. She could retreat into her room, abandon her escape attempt, and face the consequences of her stepfather's discovery that she had been planning to flee. She could continue with her plan, drop to the ground, and attempt to outrun a man who was reputed to be an excellent horseman and who clearly knew her destination. Or she could trust the one person in Virginia who had never treated her as a commodity to be traded. "Your Grace," she whispered, completing her descent and landing softly on the dew-soaked grass. "You are abroad quite early." "As are you." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of bergamot and leather, the same cologne he had worn at every social function. "Though I suspect your early rising has a rather different purpose than mine." Evangeline lifted her chin, calling upon every lesson in deportment she had ever received. "I am not certain what you mean, Your Grace." "Are you not?" He gestured toward the rope still hanging from her window, toward the traveling bag clutched in her hands. "Perhaps you were simply rearranging your room." The gentle mockery in his tone might have stung if not for the complete absence of judgment in his expression. He was not here to shame her or to drag her back to her stepfather's house. He was here for reasons of his own, and those reasons made her more nervous than any threat of exposure. "What do you want?" she asked directly, abandoning the pretense of innocence. "To offer you a choice," he said. "You can continue with your current plan, flee to Charleston, attempt to establish yourself as a governess, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for Pemberton or your stepfather to track you down, or you can come with me." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Evangeline studied his face, searching for signs of the trap she was certain must be hidden in his offer. No man made such a proposal without expecting something in return, and she had learned to be wary of gifts that came without a clearly stated price. "Come with you where?" she asked. "To my estate in the Shenandoah Valley. You would be under my protection, free from any marriage contract your stepfather might have signed on your behalf." His dark eyes met hers steadily. "You would also be free to leave whenever you chose." It was too generous, too convenient, too perfectly suited to her desperate circumstances. "And what would you require in return for this protection?" "Nothing that you are not willing to give." The answer was both reassuring and terrifying in its implications. Evangeline had spent enough time in society to understand the unspoken negotiations that occurred between men and women, the careful exchanges of favor and obligation that governed relationships outside the bounds of marriage. Alexander was offering her sanctuary, but he was also offering her a choice that could ruin her reputation as thoroughly as any scandal. "You do not even know why I am fleeing," she said. "I know enough." His voice carried a note of steel that reminded her of his reputation for ruthlessness in business matters. "I know that Pemberton has a history of violence toward women. I know that your stepfather values your family's shipping contracts more than your welfare. And I know that you would rather risk death in the wilderness than submit to a marriage that would destroy your spirit." The accuracy of his assessment took her breath away. "How could you possibly—" "Because I have been watching, Miss Ashford. I have been listening. And I have been waiting for you to realize that you cannot solve this problem alone." A sound from the house, a door closing, footsteps on the stairs, made them both freeze, Someone was awake, moving through the corridors of Ashford Manor with purpose. In moments, her absence would be discovered, and her carefully planned escape would become a manhunt. "Choose now," Alexander said, extending his hand. "Trust me, or trust to luck and your own resources." Evangeline looked at his outstretched hand, at the strong fingers that had never touched her with anything but the most proper courtesy, at the signet ring that marked him as one of the most powerful men in 2 countries. She thought of Pemberton's cold eyes, of her stepfather's indifference to her pleas, of the life of quiet desperation that awaited her if she remained. She placed her hand in his. "I choose trust," she whispered. Alexander's fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness, and she felt a shock of warmth that had nothing to do with the physical contact. "Then come. My carriage is waiting beyond the woods." They moved through the gardens with the silent efficiency of conspirators, avoiding the gravel paths that would announce their passage, keeping to the shadows cast by the ancient oaks that lined the estate. Evangeline had walked these grounds every day of her life, but tonight they seemed transformed, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "Your Grace," she said as they reached the edge of the formal gardens, "I must ask, why are you helping me?" Alexander paused, his hand still holding hers, his face turned toward the lightening sky. "Because, Miss Ashford, some cages are too beautiful to be prisons, and some birds are too rare to be caged." The poetic nature of his response surprised her. She had known him as a man of business, of careful calculation and strategic thinking. This glimpse of something deeper, more romantic, made her wonder what other secrets lay hidden behind his controlled exterior. They reached the carriage as the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the trees. It was an elegant vehicle, well sprung and comfortable, with a driver who touched his cap respectfully but asked no questions about the young lady traveling without a chaperone. Alexander handed her up with the same careful courtesy he had always shown her, but now there was an intimacy to the gesture that made her pulse quicken. "Where are we going?" she asked as the carriage began to move. "To Ravenshollow," he said. "My estate in the mountains. You will be safe there while we determine the best course of action. And if my stepfather follows, if he brings the authorities, let him try." The quiet confidence in Alexander's voice was absolute. "I have certain advantages in dealing with legal matters. Your stepfather will find that his influence extends only so far." Evangeline settled back against the velvet cushions, allowing herself to feel safe for the first time in months. But safety came with its own dangers, and she was acutely aware of the man sitting across from her, of the way his presence seemed to fill the small space of the carriage, of the questions that hung unspoken between them. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "I must know. What do you expect from me? What are the terms of this arrangement?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I expect nothing, Evangeline. I hope for everything. But I will settle for whatever you are willing to give." The use of her given name sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the morning chill. She had become accustomed to thinking of herself as a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, a commodity to be traded. To hear her name spoken with such careful tenderness was both thrilling and terrifying. "You speak as if you know me," she said, "but we have barely exchanged a dozen conversations." "Sometimes," Alexander said, his dark eyes meeting hers, "a dozen conversations can reveal more than a lifetime of casual acquaintance. I have seen how you care for your mother despite her weakness, how you champion the servants when your stepfather would dismiss them, how you smile at social gatherings while your eyes hold nothing but sadness. I have seen your courage, your intelligence, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances beyond your control." His words painted a picture of herself that Evangeline barely recognized, not the dutiful daughter or the reluctant bride, but a woman of strength and character worthy of respect. "You see too much," she whispered. "I see what others choose to ignore." Alexander leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. The question is whether you are prepared to see yourself as clearly as I see you." Before she could respond, the carriage began to slow. Through the window, Evangeline could see the gates of an estate that rivaled anything in Virginia. Wrought iron, worked in intricate patterns, stone pillars topped with carved eagles, and beyond them, a drive that curved through manicured parkland toward a house that seemed to rise from the morning mist like something from a fairy tale. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow," Alexander said, and there was something in his voice that suggested this moment had been planned long before her desperate flight from Ashford Manor. As the carriage rolled through the gates, Evangeline realized that her escape had become something far more complex than a simple flight from an unwanted marriage. She had placed herself under the protection of a man whose motives remained mysterious, whose power was absolute, and whose interest in her welfare seemed to spring from sources she did not yet understand. She was free from Pemberton's threat, but she was not yet free from danger. The greatest risk she faced now was not to her safety, but to her heart. Raven's Hollow was everything its name suggested, a Gothic revival mansion that seemed to brood magnificently against the backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains, its towers and turrets catching the morning light like something from a romantic novel. As their carriage swept up the circular drive, Evangeline caught glimpses of formal gardens, a conservatory that gleamed like crystal, and stables that housed some of the finest horseflesh she had ever seen. "It's magnificent," she breathed, forgetting for a moment the impropriety of her situation. "It was my grandfather's vision," Alexander said, watching her reaction with careful attention. He believed that a man's home should reflect not just his wealth, but his aspirations. Every stone was chosen, every window positioned, every garden planned to create something that would endure. The carriage stopped before a set of double doors that opened as if by magic, revealing a butler whose bearing suggested he had been managing great households for decades. Behind him stood a woman in the neat dress of a housekeeper, her expression welcoming but carefully neutral. "Mrs. Whitmore," Alexander said as he handed Evangeline down from the carriage. "May I present Miss Ashford? She will be our guest for the foreseeable future." "Miss Ashford," the housekeeper said with a curtsy that was perfectly respectful without being servile. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow. I have prepared the rose chamber for you, and I trust you will find everything to your satisfaction." Evangeline murmured her thanks, acutely aware of how her traveling dress and hastily packed bag must appear to these well-trained servants. She was a young woman, arriving without chaperone or proper luggage, under circumstances that could only be described as irregular. Yet neither the butler nor the housekeeper showed any sign of judgment or curiosity. "Mrs. Whitmore has been with my family for 20 years, Alexander said, as they entered the grand foyer. "Her discretion is absolute, as is her ability to anticipate every need a guest might have." The message was clear. Whatever questions the household staff might have about her presence here, they would remain unasked and unanswered. Evangeline felt a mixture of relief and unease. Alexander's power to command such loyalty was impressive, but it also reminded her of how completely she was now dependent on his goodwill. The rose chamber was a masterpiece of feminine elegance, soft pink silk wallpaper, delicate furniture that managed to be both beautiful and comfortable, and windows that overlooked the gardens where peacocks strutted across perfectly manicured lawns. A fire had been laid in the marble fireplace, and a tea service waited on a small table near the window. "I took the liberty of having some suitable garments prepared," Mrs. Whitmore said, indicating a wardrobe that stood open to reveal gowns in the latest fashion. "I estimated your measurements based on observation, but alterations can be made if necessary." Evangeline stared at the beautiful dresses, morning gowns, walking dresses, even an evening gown of midnight blue silk that would have been appropriate for the finest Richmond ballroom. When did you? "His Grace sent word yesterday that we might be expecting a guest," Mrs. Whitmore said smoothly. "I have found it best to be prepared for any eventuality." "Yesterday?" Alexander had been planning this rescue before she had even made her final decision to flee. The realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. How long had he been watching her? How much had he anticipated? "I will leave you to rest and refresh yourself," Mrs. Whitmore continued. "His Grace has asked that you join him for breakfast when you are ready. There is no hurry. The morning is yours to command." When she was alone, Evangeline sank into the chair by the window, trying to process the events of the last few hours. She had awakened in her stepfather's house as a prisoner facing an unwanted marriage. Now she sat in luxury that surpassed anything she had ever experienced, under the protection of a man whose motives remained entirely mysterious. She rose and moved to the wardrobe, running her fingers over the silk and muslin gowns that hung there. Each was perfectly suited to her coloring, each cut in the style that flattered her figure most. Someone had studied her very carefully indeed to achieve such accuracy. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come," she called, expecting Mrs. Whitmore. Instead, Alexander entered, carrying a tray that held fresh coffee, warm bread, and what appeared to be her favorite preserves. He had changed from his traveling clothes into a dark green coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, and his hair was slightly damp, as if he had recently bathed. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on the table near the window. "Mrs. Whitmore mentioned that you had refused the tea service." "I was overwhelmed," Evangeline admitted. "This is all very generous, Your Grace, but I must ask—" "Alexander," he corrected gently. "We are far beyond the need for such formality, I think." The intimacy of using his given name made her pulse quicken. "Alexander, then. I must ask what you expect in return for this kindness. No man provides such luxury without expecting compensation." Alexander poured coffee with the same careful precision she had observed in all his actions. "What if I told you that I expect nothing beyond the pleasure of your company? I would say that you are either lying or that you are a very unusual man. Perhaps I am both." He handed her a cup, taking care that their fingers did not touch. "Tell me, Evangeline, what do you know of my circumstances? Of why I am in Virginia rather than managing my estates in England?" The question surprised her. "Very little. There has been speculation, of course, but no one seems to know the true reason for your presence here." "I am here," Alexander said, settling into the chair across from her, "because I am investigating certain irregularities in the shipping trade between Virginia and England. Specifically, I am looking into reports that someone has been using legitimate merchant vessels to transport information to French agents." Evangeline set down her cup with trembling hands. "You think my family's ships? I think your stepfather has been very careless about the cargo his vessels carry and the passengers they transport." Alexander's voice was gentle, but implacable. "I also think that your engagement to Pemberton was arranged not just for financial reasons, but to provide cover for activities that could be considered treasonous." The room seemed to spin around her. "Are you saying that my stepfather is a traitor?" "I am saying that he has allowed his ships to be used by people who do not have America's best interests at heart. Whether he is an active participant or merely a convenient fool remains to be determined." Evangeline thought of her stepfather's recent prosperity, of the new contracts that had appeared seemingly from nowhere, of the strange men who had begun visiting Ashford Manor at odd hours, and Pemberton is deeply involved in whatever scheme is being perpetrated. Your marriage to him would have given him legal access to your family's shipping records, as well as providing him with a respectable cover for his activities. The implications hit her like a physical blow. "So my escape has disrupted their plans considerably. They will be looking for you, Evangeline, and not just because of wounded pride or financial considerations. You represent a threat to their security." She rose from her chair and moved to the window, staring out at the peaceful gardens while her mind raced through the possibilities. "Why are you telling me this? Why not simply let me flee to Charleston as I planned?" "Because Charleston would not have been far enough, because you would have been found within a week, and because—" Alexander paused, and when she turned to look at him, his expression was more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Because I could not bear to see you destroyed by forces you do not understand." The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "You barely know me. I know enough." He rose and moved to stand beside her at the window, careful to maintain a proper distance. "I know that you have been trying to protect your mother from your stepfather's increasingly erratic behavior. I know that you have been asking questions about the family business that have made certain people very nervous. And I know that you discovered something in your stepfather's study that prompted your decision to flee." Evangeline's hand moved instinctively to her reticule, where she had hidden the letter she had found among her stepfather's papers. A letter that detailed payments for services rendered, written in a code she did not understand but recognized as significant. "You know about the letter," she said. "I suspected you had found something. Your behavior at the Randolph ball last week suggested that you had learned information that distressed you greatly." She remembered that evening, the way she had struggled to maintain her composure while dancing with Pemberton, the sick feeling in her stomach as she watched him charm the other guests, while knowing what she now suspected about his true nature. "What do you intend to do with this information?" she asked. "That depends entirely on what you choose to do. You can remain here, safe and protected, while I gather the evidence needed to expose this conspiracy. Or you can help me, using your knowledge of your family's business and your access to information that I cannot obtain through other means." The choice he offered was both thrilling and terrifying. To remain passive, to accept his protection while others fought her battles, was the safe course. But it was also a return to the helplessness she had been trying to escape. "If I help you," she said slowly, "what would that involve?" "It would involve considerable danger. It would require you to return to Richmond society, to maintain the pretense that you are still considering marriage to Pemberton while gathering information about his activities. It would mean living a lie while surrounded by people who wish you harm. And if I choose safety instead, then you will remain here, under my protection, until the matter is resolved. You will be comfortable, well cared for, and completely safe. You will also be completely dependent on my goodwill for the rest of your life." The stark choice he presented crystallized everything she had been feeling since her arrival at Ravenshollow. Safety was a cage, no matter how beautiful the bars. Freedom required risk, required the courage to act rather than simply react. "There is something else you should know," Alexander said quietly, "something that may influence your decision." "What?" "Your stepfather has already reported your disappearance to the authorities. He has claimed that you were abducted, possibly by foreign agents seeking to use you against your family's shipping interests." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. "He would not. He would, and he has. By tomorrow, there will be search parties combing the countryside, rewards posted, and your description circulated to every sheriff and magistrate in Virginia. If you are found, you will be returned to your stepfather's custody as a victim in need of protection." The trap was perfect. Her stepfather had turned her escape into evidence of the very conspiracy she was trying to avoid, making her a victim rather than a rebel. Any attempt to tell the truth would be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized young woman who had been influenced by enemy agents. "So I have no choice at all," she said bitterly. "You have the most important choice of all," Alexander replied. "You can choose to be a victim of circumstances, or you can choose to be an agent of justice. You can allow others to define your story, or you can write it yourself. At this moment, would you have told the truth?" The question hung in the air between them, unspoken but understood. Evangeline looked at this man who had rescued her from one trap, only to offer her the chance to walk willingly into another, who spoke of justice and choice, while making it clear that safety was an illusion. "If I help you," she said finally, "what guarantee do I have that you will not simply use me as Pemberton and my stepfather intended to do?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "You have my word," he said simply, "and you have this." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document, placing it on the table between them. "A marriage contract," he said, "between you and me, drawn up by my solicitors and witnessed according to Virginia law. If you choose to help me, if you choose to face this danger, you will do so as my wife, with all the legal protections that status provides." Evangeline stared at the document as if it were a snake that might strike. "You are proposing marriage?" "I am proposing a partnership. A legal arrangement that would protect you from your stepfather's authority while giving you the freedom to act according to your own conscience." Alexander's voice was carefully neutral. The marriage would be real in the eyes of the law, but the terms would be entirely your own to dictate. "And if I refuse? Then you remain here as my protected guest, and I pursue this investigation alone. The choice is yours, Evangeline. It has always been yours." She picked up the marriage contract with trembling fingers, scanning the terms that had been laid out in careful legal language. It was unlike any marriage agreement she had ever seen. There were provisions for her financial independence, for her right to own property, for her freedom to leave if she chose. It was less a contract of ownership than a treaty between equals. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you offer this?" Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Because I have been watching you for 6 months, and in all that time I have never seen you make a choice based on fear. Because you deserve better than to be traded like cargo between men who see you only as a means to their own ends. And because I have been half in love with you since the first time I saw you refuse to be diminished by your circumstances." The confession hung between them like a bridge she could choose to cross or burn. Evangeline looked at this man who had anticipated her every move, who had prepared for her arrival before she had even decided to flee, who was now offering her everything she had dreamed of: freedom, partnership, and the possibility of love. "I need time to consider," she said. "Time is a luxury we may not have," Alexander replied gently. "Your stepfather's search parties will begin their work at dawn. If we are to act, we must act quickly." Evangeline moved to the window, watching the peacocks strut across the lawn with their magnificent tails spread wide. They were beautiful, proud creatures, but they were also flightless. Their beauty came at the cost of their freedom. She would not be a peacock. "I accept," she said, turning back to face him. "I accept your proposal, your partnership, and your protection, but I have conditions of my own." Alexander smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression reached his eyes. "I would expect nothing less. What are your terms? If we do this, if we become partners in truth as well as law, then I want honesty between us. No more watching from shadows, no more anticipating my moves without my knowledge. We face this danger together as equals." "Agreed. And when this is over, when justice has been served and the conspiracy exposed, I want the freedom to choose what comes next. Marriage or separation, partnership or independence. The choice will be mine to make." "Agreed." "Then let us begin," Evangeline said, moving to the writing desk and taking up a pen. "Let us see what we can accomplish when we stop running from danger and start running toward justice." As she signed her name to the marriage contract, Evangeline felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with legal formalities and everything to do with finally, truly choosing her own destiny. The wedding ceremony took place in the library of Ravenshollow, witnessed by Mrs. Whitmore and the estate's chaplain, an elderly man who asked no questions about the unusual circumstances of the union. Evangeline wore the midnight blue silk gown that had been waiting in her wardrobe, and Alexander presented her with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. "By the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Virginia," the chaplain intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." When Alexander kissed her, it was with the careful restraint of a man who understood that their marriage was as much a strategic alliance as a romantic union. But there was warmth in his touch, promise in the way his hands framed her face, and Evangeline felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said softly, and the name sounded strange and wonderful on his lips. "Your Grace," she replied, then caught herself. "Alexander, my husband." The words felt foreign, but not unwelcome. She had awakened that morning as Miss Evangeline Ashford, a woman fleeing an unwanted marriage. She was now the Duchess of Ravenshollow, a woman who had chosen her own fate and found it good. But their brief moment of celebration was interrupted by the arrival of a rider, whose urgent message shattered the peaceful morning like glass. "Your Grace," the man said, dismounting from a horse that was lathered with sweat, "I bring word from Richmond. Mr. Ashford has issued a reward of $5,000 for information leading to his stepdaughter's safe return. He claims she was abducted by foreign agents and may be in mortal danger." Alexander's expression darkened. "What else?" "Lord Pemberton has offered an additional reward for her recovery. He has also petitioned the governor to authorize the use of militia in the search, claiming that Miss Ashford may have been taken to extract information about her family's shipping operations." Evangeline felt the walls closing in around her once again. Her stepfather and Pemberton were not simply searching for a runaway bride. They were orchestrating a manhunt that would make it impossible for her to move freely, impossible for her to gather the evidence needed to expose their crimes. "There is more, Your Grace," the messenger continued. "Mr. Ashford has announced that his stepdaughter was unstable. He has produced letters allegedly written by Miss Ashford that suggest she had been corresponding with suspicious individuals, possibly foreign agents. He claims her abduction may have been the result of her own naive involvement with dangerous people. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. By portraying her as an unstable young woman who had been manipulated by enemy agents, her stepfather had ensured that anything she might say about his activities would be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized victim. Even if she managed to present evidence of the conspiracy, it would be seen as proof that she had been corrupted by her captors. "Forged letters," Alexander said, "and it was not a question. Almost certainly, Your Grace, but they appear authentic, and they have been witnessed by several prominent citizens who claim to have been concerned about Miss Ashford's behavior in recent weeks." Evangeline sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception being perpetrated in her name. "They have thought of everything," she whispered. "Not everything," Alexander said grimly. "They have made one crucial error, which is, they have assumed that you are still the frightened young woman who fled from Ashford Manor. They do not yet know that you are now under the protection of the British Crown, or that your marriage to me has given you legal standing that cannot be easily dismissed." The messenger looked between them with growing confusion. "Your Grace, forgive me, but I do not understand." "Allow me to present my wife," Alexander said formally. "The Duchess of Ravenshollow, formerly Miss Evangeline Ashford. We were married this morning according to Virginia law." The man's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. "Your Grace, this changes everything. If Miss Ashford, that is, if her Grace is now under your protection, then any attempt to remove her from my custody would constitute an act of aggression against a representative of the British government," Alexander finished. "My diplomatic status provides certain immunities that Mr. Ashford and Lord Pemberton may not have considered." But even as he spoke, Evangeline could see the concern in his eyes. Diplomatic immunity was a powerful protection, but it was not absolute. If her stepfather could convince the authorities that she was a victim of foreign manipulation, if he could present evidence that her marriage had been coerced, then even Alexander's status might not be enough to protect her. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now we go on the offensive," Alexander replied. "We return to Richmond, announce our marriage publicly, and begin gathering the evidence we need to expose the truth about your stepfather's activities." Return to Richmond. Evangeline felt her heart skip a beat. "But that is exactly what they want, to get me back within their reach. It is also the last thing they will expect. They are searching the countryside, for a frightened fugitive. They are not prepared to face a duchess who has chosen to return of her own free will. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also, Evangeline realized, their only chance of success. As long as she remained hidden at Ravenshollow, she would be seen as a victim in need of rescue. Only by returning to Richmond society as Alexander's wife could she hope to be taken seriously as an accuser. "There will be risks," Alexander continued. "Your stepfather and Pemberton will not simply accept your marriage and withdraw their accusations. They will try to discredit you, to claim that you were coerced or manipulated. They may even attempt more direct action." "You mean they might try to kill me?" "I mean they might try. They will not succeed." The quiet confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Evangeline had learned not to underestimate the lengths to which desperate men would go to protect their secrets. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. Tonight, we prepare. You will need to study the evidence I have gathered about your stepfather's shipping operations. Familiarize yourself with the names and dates that will be crucial to our case. And we will need to prepare for the social campaign that will be just as important as the legal one." Social campaign. "Richmond society will be watching every move we make, analyzing every word we speak, looking for signs that our marriage is not what it appears to be. We must convince them that we are a love match, that your flight from Ashford Manor was motivated by passion rather than fear, that your marriage to me was a romantic elopement rather than a desperate escape." The irony was not lost on her. To expose the truth about her stepfather's crimes, she would have to live a lie about her own motivations. To prove that she was not a victim, she would have to pretend that she was something else entirely, a woman so in love that she had risked everything for romance. "Can we do it?" she asked. "Can we convince them that our marriage is real?" Alexander moved closer, close enough that she could see her reflection in his dark eyes. "That depends," he said softly, "on how good an actress you are willing to become. And you? How will you play the role of the besotted husband?" "That," Alexander said, reaching out to touch her cheek with gentle fingers, "will require no acting at all." The confession sent warmth flooding through her chest, followed immediately by a sharp stab of fear. If Alexander's feelings for her were real, if this marriage was more than a strategic alliance, then the stakes were higher than she had imagined. She would not only be risking her own life and freedom, she would be risking the heart of a man who had already sacrificed too much for her sake. "Alexander," she began, but he silenced her with a finger against her lips. "Whatever you are about to say, whatever doubts you are harboring, save them for later. Tonight, we prepare for war. Tomorrow, we return to Richmond and face our enemies together. And if we fail, then we will fail together, as husband and wife, as partners in truth as well as law." Alexander's smile was fierce and beautiful. "But we will not fail, Evangeline. I have been planning this campaign for too long to allow it to end in defeat." As night fell over Ravenshollow, Evangeline found herself in the library with Alexander, poring over shipping manifests and coded correspondence, learning the names of the men who had betrayed their country for gold. The evidence was damning, but it was also incomplete. They would need more proof, more witnesses, more documentation to build a case that could not be dismissed or discredited. "There," Alexander said, pointing to a particular entry in a shipping log. "That vessel carried more than tobacco to London. According to my sources, it also carried intelligence about American naval movements, information that was passed to French agents within days of its arrival." Evangeline studied the entry, recognizing her stepfather's handwriting in the margin. "This is his notation system. He always marked special cargo with these symbols. Can you decode it?" "I think so. I helped him with his correspondence when I was younger, before he remarried, and decided that I was more valuable as a marriage prospect than as a clerk." She traced the symbols with her finger, remembering long afternoons spent in her stepfather's study, learning the intricacies of the shipping business that had made her family's fortune. "Here," she said, pointing to a series of numbers. This indicates the payment received for special services, and this symbol means that the cargo was to be delivered to a specific contact in London. Enough to hang him, Alexander said grimly. If we can prove it. But this is just one shipment, one transaction. We need to show a pattern, a sustained campaign of treason. Who do you want me? They worked through the night, building their case document by document, cross-referencing shipping records with intelligence reports, tracing the flow of money and information that had funded the conspiracy. By dawn, they had assembled a dossier that would destroy not just her stepfather and Pemberton, but a network of traitors that reached into the highest levels of Virginia society. It is enough, Alexander said, as the first light of morning streamed through the library windows. More than enough to bring them all to justice. Evangeline looked at the evidence spread across the library table, at the proof of crimes that had cost American lives and threatened the security of the young nation. And now we return to Richmond to present it. Now we return to Richmond to end this, Alexander corrected. One way or another. As their carriage rolled through the gates of Ravenshollow for what might be the last time, Evangeline felt a mixture of fear and anticipation that was almost overwhelming. She was returning to the city of her birth as a different person, not the dutiful daughter who had fled in the darkness, but a woman who had chosen her own destiny and was prepared to fight for it. The game was about to begin in earnest, and the stakes could not be higher. Their return to Richmond created exactly the sensation Alexander had predicted. News of their marriage spread through the city like wildfire, dominating conversation in every drawing room and coffeehouse. The story that emerged was a romantic one. The mysterious English duke who had swept the beautiful Miss Ashford off her feet. The secret courtship that had culminated in an elopement that defied social convention and parental authority. It was, Evangeline reflected as she read the newspaper accounts over breakfast in their suite at the finest hotel in Richmond, a much more palatable narrative than the truth. Society preferred love stories to tales of conspiracy and betrayal, and they were eager to embrace the romance while ignoring the darker implications of her flight from Ashford Manor. "The governor has agreed to see us this afternoon," Alexander announced, setting down his own newspaper with satisfaction. "Our marriage has given us the social standing we need to be taken seriously, but it has also made us targets." "What do you mean?" "Your stepfather called on me this morning while you were still sleeping. He was most insistent that I allow him to speak with you privately, to assure himself of your welfare." Evangeline felt a chill run down her spine. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that my wife was indisposed, and that any communication he wished to have with her could be conducted through me as her legal representative." Alexander's smile was cold. He was not pleased. "I imagine not." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but he made it clear that he considers our marriage invalid, that he believes you were coerced or manipulated into the union. He has also suggested that I may be the foreign agent responsible for your alleged abduction." The accusation was clever, Evangeline realized. By casting Alexander as the villain in her story, her stepfather could discredit both of them, while positioning himself as the concerned parent seeking to rescue his daughter from a dangerous situation. "What about Pemberton?" "Has been notably absent from the social scene since our return. My sources suggest that he is meeting with certain individuals who prefer to conduct their business away from public scrutiny." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Alexander answered it personally, accepting a sealed note from a hotel servant. His expression darkened as he read the contents. "What is it?" Evangeline asked. "An invitation to a private meeting. Your stepfather wishes to discuss terms for your return to his custody." "Terms?" "He is prepared to offer me a substantial sum in exchange for an annulment of our marriage. He claims that you were not of sound mind when you consented to the union, and that he has medical testimony to support his position." Evangeline laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Medical testimony from whom?" "I have never been examined by any physician for mental instability." from Dr. Pemberton's personal physician, who will swear that he treated you for nervous disorders and recommended that you be kept under close supervision." Alexander crumpled the note in his fist. "They are prepared to have you declared incompetent if necessary." The trap was closing around them with inexorable precision. Her stepfather and Pemberton had anticipated every move, prepared for every contingency. If they could not reclaim her through legal means, they would use medical authority to have her declared unfit to make her own decisions. "There is something else," Alexander said quietly. "The note mentions that they have evidence of your correspondence with foreign agents, letters that prove you were already compromised before our marriage. If I do not agree to their terms, they will present this evidence to the authorities and demand that both of us be arrested for treason." The forged letters, almost certainly. But forgeries that will be difficult to disprove, especially if they are supported by witness testimony from respected members of society. Evangeline moved to the window, looking down at the busy street where carriages and pedestrians moved about their daily business, oblivious to the drama being played out in the hotel suite above them. "They have us trapped," she said. "They think they do," Alexander corrected, "but they have made one crucial error, which is, they have assumed that we will play by their rules, that we will allow them to control the narrative and dictate the terms of engagement." Alexander moved to stand beside her at the window. "What if we refuse to play their game at all?" "What do you mean?" "What if we present our evidence publicly, before they can present theirs? What if we force them to respond to our accusations, rather than allowing them to make accusations against us?" The idea was audacious, dangerous, and completely contrary to every rule of social engagement that governed Richmond society. Ladies did not make public accusations against gentlemen. Wives did not testify against their families. Diplomatic representatives did not air their suspicions in the press. "It would cause a scandal," Evangeline said. "It would cause a revolution," Alexander replied. "But it would also force the truth into the open, where it cannot be hidden or manipulated. And if we are wrong, if our evidence is not as strong as we believe, then we will face the consequences together. But if we are right, if we can prove that your stepfather and Pemberton have been betraying their country for profit, then their accusations against us will be seen for what they are, the desperate lies of traitors trying to escape justice." Evangeline considered the choice before them. They could accept her stepfather's terms, could allow their marriage to be annulled and their evidence to be suppressed in exchange for their freedom, or they could risk everything on a single desperate gamble that would either vindicate them completely or destroy them utterly. "How would we do it?" she asked. "Do. The Richmond Inquirer has agreed to publish a full account of our investigation, including copies of the shipping records and correspondence we have gathered. The story will appear in tomorrow morning's edition before your stepfather and Pemberton can respond. They will deny everything. Of course they will. But denial is not proof, and we have documentation that will be difficult to explain away." Alexander turned to face her directly. "The question is whether you are prepared to become a public figure, to have your name and your story discussed in every newspaper in America." "I stopped being a private person the moment I married you," Evangeline said. "If we are to do this, if we are to expose the truth, then let us do it completely. No half measures, no careful diplomacy. Let us tell the world exactly what these men have done, and let justice take its course." Alexander smiled, and she saw in his expression the same fierce determination that had driven him to rescue her from Ashford Manor. "Then let us write our story, my dear wife, and let history judge whether we chose correctly." They spent the afternoon crafting their public statement, a carefully worded account that laid out the evidence of treason while explaining Evangeline's flight from an arranged marriage that would have made her an unwitting accomplice to her stepfather's crimes. The tone was measured, factual, and devastating in its implications. "There," Alexander said as he signed the final document. "Tomorrow morning Richmond will wake to find that their understanding of recent events has been revised. And tonight we attend the governor's reception as planned. We smile, we dance, we play the role of the happy newlyweds while our enemies make their final preparations. Tomorrow, we discover whether truth is indeed more powerful than deception. The governor's reception was a glittering affair, attended by the cream of Virginia society. Evangeline wore the sapphire necklace that had been Alexander's wedding gift, and she moved through the crowd with the confidence of a woman who had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. The whispers followed her, of course, speculation about her marriage, her elopement, her stepfather's reaction to her unexpected union. "Your Grace," a familiar voice said behind her, and she turned to find Lord Pemberton approaching with a smile that never reached his eyes. "How lovely to see you again. Marriage appears to agree with you." "Lord Pemberton," she replied with perfect courtesy. "How kind of you to say so. I confess myself surprised by your sudden decision to wed. The last time we spoke, you seemed quite content with our own arrangement." The lie was spoken smoothly, designed to suggest that she had been a willing participant in their engagement, rather than a victim of coercion. "Circumstances change," Evangeline said, "as do hearts." "Indeed they do." Pemberton's pale eyes glittered with malice. "I do hope your new husband appreciates the complexity of your situation. Not every man would be willing to take on a wife with such interesting connections." The threat was clear. He was reminding her that he still held the forged letters, still had the power to destroy her reputation and Alexander's career. But Evangeline had moved beyond fear, beyond the need to placate men who saw her only as a pawn in their larger games. "My husband appreciates honesty," she said clearly. "He values truth above convenience, justice above profit. I find those qualities refreshing." Pemberton's smile faltered slightly. "How fortunate for you both. I trust you will continue to find them so." "I am certain we will," Alexander said, appearing at Evangeline's side with the silent grace that marked all his movements. "Lord Pemberton, I understand you have been making inquiries about my wife's welfare. How thoughtful of you." "Merely the concern of an old friend," Pemberton replied, his voice carrying a subtle edge. "Miss Ashford, forgive me, Your Grace, was such an important part of our social circle. Her sudden departure caused considerable distress among those who care for her welfare." "How touching," Alexander said, his tone perfectly polite and utterly cold. "I am certain my wife appreciates your continued interest in her happiness." The three of them stood in a triangle of barely concealed hostility, surrounded by the glittering crowd of Richmond society. Other guests had begun to notice the tension, and Evangeline could feel their curious gazes, could almost hear the speculation that would fill tomorrow's drawing-room conversations. "Your Grace," Pemberton said, addressing Alexander directly, "perhaps we might speak privately. There are certain matters regarding your wife's previous circumstances that might be of interest to you." "I am fully informed of my wife's circumstances," Alexander replied, "past, present, and future. If you have concerns about her welfare, you may address them to me directly, here and now." Pemberton's mask of civility slipped slightly. "Some conversations are better conducted away from curious ears, and some truths are better spoken in the light than whispered in shadows," Evangeline said, her voice carrying clearly across the immediate area. "If you have something to say about my character or my choices, Lord Pemberton, I would prefer to hear it directly." A small circle of silence had formed around them as nearby guests strained to hear the exchange. Pemberton glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the confrontation. "Perhaps this is neither the time nor the place," he began. "On the contrary," Alexander interrupted, "I believe this is exactly the right time and place. You see, Lord Pemberton, my wife and I have nothing to hide. Our marriage is based on mutual respect, shared values, and complete honesty. Can you say the same about your own arrangements?" The challenge was unmistakable, and Pemberton's face flushed with anger. "I will not be lectured about arrangements by a man who swept into our society and stole another man's intended bride." "Stole?" Evangeline's voice was sharp with indignation. "I am not property to be stolen, Lord Pemberton." I am a woman with the right to choose her own husband, her own destiny. If you believed otherwise, then you understood neither me nor the nature of marriage itself." The crowd around them had grown larger, and Evangeline could see her stepfather pushing through the press of bodies, his face dark with fury. The confrontation she had dreaded was about to become very public indeed. "Evangeline," her stepfather said, as he reached their small circle, "I think it is time you came home. This performance has gone on quite long enough." "I am home," she replied calmly, "with my husband, where I belong." "Your husband?" Her stepfather's laugh was harsh and bitter. "This man has filled your head with romantic nonsense, convinced you to abandon your family, your duty, your proper place in society. He has taken advantage of your youth and inexperience for his own purposes." "And what purposes might those be?" Alexander asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Access to our family's business, our shipping records, our connections in London? Did you think we would not discover your true motives, Your Grace? Did you believe we would simply allow you to use our daughter for your own schemes?" The accusation hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Evangeline felt the crowd's attention focus on them with laser intensity, felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their hunger for scandal. "My motives," Alexander said clearly, "are exactly what they appear to be. I married Evangeline because I love her, because I respect her intelligence and courage, and because I believe she deserves better than to be traded like cargo between men who see her only as a means to their own ends." "Love?" Her stepfather's voice dripped with contempt. "You speak of love while you corrupt an innocent girl, while you turn her against her own family, while you use her to gain access to information that could damage American interests." "The only threat to American interests," Evangeline said, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent crowd, "comes from men who would sell their country's secrets for profit, who would sacrifice their nation's security for personal gain." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock and speculation that spread through the assembled guests. Her stepfather's face went white, while Pemberton took a step backward as if he had been struck. "You do not know what you are saying," her stepfather hissed. "You have been poisoned against your own family, filled with lies and suspicions." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Evangeline interrupted. "I know about the special cargo your ships have been carrying, about the payments you have received for services rendered, about the intelligence that has been passed to French agents through your shipping network." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. Accusations of treason were not made lightly in Richmond society, and the implications of Evangeline's words sent shockwaves through the assembled guests. "These are the ravings of a disturbed mind," Pemberton said quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Miss Ashford, Her Grace, has clearly been subjected to influences that have affected her judgment. She needs medical attention, not encouragement in these fantasies." "Fantasies?" Alexander reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. "Perhaps you would care to explain this shipping manifest, which details cargo that was never officially recorded, payments that were never officially received." He held the paper high enough for the crowd to see, and Evangeline watched her stepfather's face cycle through a series of expressions: denial, calculation, and finally a cold rage that made her step closer to Alexander's side. "Where did you get that?" her stepfather demanded. "From your own files," Evangeline said, "from the records you thought were safely hidden in your private study. Did you really believe I would remain ignorant forever? Did you think I would never wonder why French agents seemed to know the movements of American ships, why so many of our vessels fell prey to perfectly coordinated attacks? You searched my private papers?" Her stepfather's voice was barely controlled. "You violated the sanctity of my home, my trust. I discovered the truth about your crimes," Evangeline replied, "and I chose to act on that knowledge rather than become an accomplice through silence." The governor himself was pushing through the crowd now, his face grave with concern. "What is the meaning of this disturbance?" he demanded. "Your Excellency," Alexander said, bowing slightly. My wife and I were just discussing certain irregularities in the shipping trade that we believe warrant official investigation. Irregularities. Evidence of treason, Your Excellency. Documents that prove American military intelligence has been sold to French agents, that ships flying American flags have been used to transport enemy spies and gold. The governor's expression hardened. These are serious accusations, Your Grace. Do you have proof to support them? We do, Evangeline said, stepping forward. Shipping manifests, coded correspondence, financial records that trace payments from French sources directly to American accounts. Everything needed to expose a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of Virginia society. Lies, her stepfather shouted. Forgeries created by foreign agents to discredit loyal Americans. Your Excellency, my stepdaughter has been corrupted, turned against her own family and country by this man and his associates. Then you will welcome an official investigation, the governor said calmly. If these documents are forgeries, if these accusations are false, then a proper inquiry will clear your name and expose the truth. Of course, Pemberton said quickly. We have nothing to hide, nothing to fear from honest investigation. But we must also consider the source of these accusations, a young woman who has clearly been manipulated, whose judgment has been compromised by romantic infatuation and foreign influence. My judgment, Evangeline said clearly, has never been clearer. I know what I have seen, what I have discovered, what I have chosen to do about it. I'm not a victim of manipulation. I am a woman who has chosen to stand for truth and justice, regardless of the personal cost. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of the extraordinary drama unfolding before them. This was no longer a simple family dispute or romantic scandal. This was a public accusation of treason made by a duke's wife against her own stepfather in front of the governor and the cream of Virginia society. Your Excellency, Alexander said, I formally request that you authorize an immediate investigation into these matters. My wife and I are prepared to present our evidence to any tribunal you deem appropriate, to submit to any questioning you require, to cooperate fully with any inquiry you choose to conduct. And if the investigation proves your accusations false, the governor asked, then we will face the consequences of our error, Alexander replied. But if the investigation proves them true, then justice must be served, regardless of the social standing of those involved. The governor looked around the silent crowd, at the faces of Richmond's most prominent citizens, at the weight of expectation and curiosity that pressed upon them all. Very well, he said finally, I will order an immediate investigation. Mr. Ashford, Lord Pemberton, you will make yourselves available for questioning. Your Grace, you and your wife will present your evidence to a special tribunal tomorrow morning. Your Excellency, her stepfather said desperately, surely you cannot give credence to accusations made by a woman who has clearly been— I give credence to evidence, the governor interrupted, and I will follow that evidence wherever it leads, regardless of who might be implicated or who might be vindicated. As the crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement and speculation, Evangeline felt a mixture of relief and terror. They had committed themselves publicly, had staked their reputations and their lives on the strength of their evidence. There could be no retreat now, no quiet resolution behind closed doors. It is done, Alexander said quietly as they made their way toward the exit. Yes, Evangeline replied. For better or worse, it is done. Do you regret it? The public nature of our accusation? Evangeline considered the question as they stepped out into the cool night air. No, she said finally. Secrets thrive in darkness, but truth flourishes in the light. If we are to expose this conspiracy, if we are to see justice done, then it must be done openly, where all can see and judge for themselves. And if we have made enemies tonight, then we have also made allies. The governor, at least, seems willing to listen to evidence rather than prejudice. Evangeline took Alexander's arm as they walked toward their carriage. Besides, we were already enemies of these men. At least now the battle lines are clearly drawn. As their carriage rolled through the darkened streets of Richmond, Evangeline reflected on how much had changed since her desperate flight from Ashford Manor. She had begun this journey as a frightened young woman fleeing an unwanted marriage. She was ending it as a duchess who had publicly accused her own stepfather of treason, who had chosen truth over safety, justice over family loyalty. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Alexander said, taking her hand in his, "I want you to know that I am proud of your courage tonight. You could have remained silent, could have allowed others to fight this battle for you. Instead, you chose to stand and speak truth to power." "We chose," Evangeline corrected. "We stand together or we fall together. That was our bargain, and I intend to honor it, even if it costs us everything, especially if it costs us everything. Some things are worth any price, Alexander. Honor, justice, the right to choose one's own destiny, these are not luxuries to be traded away for safety or convenience." Alexander raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I love you," he said simply, "not just for your beauty or your intelligence, but for your courage, your integrity, your refusal to be diminished by circumstances beyond your control." "And I love you," Evangeline replied, surprised by how easily the words came, how right they felt. "For seeing me as I truly am, for believing in my strength even when I doubted it myself, for offering me partnership instead of protection." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges that lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring the tribunal, the presentation of evidence, the moment of truth that would determine not just their own fates, but the fate of the conspiracy they had worked so hard to expose. "Alexander," Evangeline said as their carriage turned onto the street where their hotel stood, "there is something I need to tell you." "What is it?" When I first accepted your proposal, when I agreed to this marriage, I thought I was making a practical choice, a strategic alliance that would serve both our purposes. I did not expect—" She paused, searching for the right words. "I did not expect to find love in the midst of all this danger and deception. And now I know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the tribunal decides, whatever consequences we face, I want to face them as your wife, not just in law but in truth. I want our marriage to be real, Alexander. I want us to be real." Alexander's smile was radiant in the lamplight. "We have been real from the moment you placed your hand in mine and chose trust over fear. Everything else is just paperwork." As they entered their hotel, Evangeline felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with legal formalities and everything to do with finally, truly choosing her own destiny. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new choices to be made. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, beside the man who had seen her potential and helped her claim it, who had offered her partnership and found love instead. The game was nearly over, and she was no longer afraid of the outcome. 3 months later, the trial of Mr. Ashford and Lord Pemberton had been the sensation of the American press, dominating headlines from Richmond to Boston. The evidence that Alexander and Evangeline had presented to the special tribunal had proven even more damning than they had hoped. Shipping records that detailed a systematic campaign of espionage, financial documents that traced French gold through a network of American collaborators, and testimony from captured French agents who were eager to cooperate in exchange for clemency. Both men had been convicted of treason and sentenced to hang, their estates confiscated, their names struck from the rolls of honor where they had once been inscribed. The conspiracy they had led was exposed in all its scope and complexity, leading to arrests and investigations that reached from Virginia to London. Evangeline had testified with quiet dignity, her words carrying the weight of truth and the authority of someone who had risked everything to expose the crimes she had witnessed. The press had been fascinated by the story of the Duke's wife, who had turned spy, who had gathered evidence against her own stepfather in service to her adopted country. But she had watched none of the executions. By the time justice was finally served, she was already far from Richmond, walking in the gardens of Raven's Hollow with Alexander at her side, planning a future that belonged entirely to them. "The roses are particularly beautiful this year," Alexander said, pausing beside a bush heavy with white blooms. "They are," Evangeline agreed, though her attention was focused not on the flowers, but on the letter in her hands. A message from the president himself, thanking her for her service to the nation and formally recognizing her contributions to American security. "Any regrets?" Alexander asked, noting her thoughtful expression. Evangeline considered the question seriously, thinking of all the pain and fear she had endured, all the moments when she had wondered if she would survive to see another day, all the bridges she had burned in service to truth and justice. "No," she said finally. "Every choice led me here, to you, to this life we are building together. I cannot regret the path that brought me such happiness, even the darkest moments." "Especially the darkest moments," Evangeline replied. "They taught me what I was capable of, showed me that I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Without them, I might never have found the courage to love you as completely as I do." Alexander smiled, pulling her closer against his side. "And what of the future? What shall we do with all this peace and prosperity?" "And we shall live," Evangeline said simply. "We shall love, we shall laugh, we shall build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. And perhaps," she paused, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach, "perhaps we shall give our children the freedom to choose their own destinies, as we have chosen ours." Alexander's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Evangeline, are you saying—" "I am saying that our family is about to grow, that our love has created something new and wonderful, that the future holds even more joy than we dared to imagine." Alexander swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle of pure happiness, while she laughed with delight. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears of joy. "A child," he whispered. Our child," Evangeline confirmed. "A son or daughter who will grow up free, who will never know what it means to be traded like cargo or forced into unwanted arrangements. A child who will choose love over duty, truth over convenience, courage over safety." As the sun began to set over the gardens of Raven's Hollow, over the estate that was now their shared home, over the future that stretched before them bright with possibility, Evangeline Blackwood, Duchess of Raven's Hollow, felt a peace she had never known before. She had found her place in the world, not as someone's property or problem to be solved, but as a woman who had chosen her own destiny and found it good. The past was behind them, with all its pain and deception. The future stretched ahead, bright with promise and possibility. And in this moment, surrounded by love and safety and the absolute certainty of her own worth, Evangeline knew that she had made the right choice. She had chosen truth over lies, courage over fear, love over duty. She had chosen to write her own story rather than allow others to write it for her, and she had chosen well. Which choice would you have made? If this tale of courage, love, and impossible choices moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic historical romances that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Evangeline's place? Would you have chosen truth over safety, love over duty? Your engagement helps us bring you more stories where love conquers all and justice prevails. Thank you for joining us at Raven's Hollow, and until our next tale unfolds, remember that the greatest courage is choosing to write your own destiny.